This article was posted on Zero Hedge recently. Headline is Western companies shocked after China rushes through anti-sanctions law. This is something they teased, I think, a month back. A lot of the Western media didn't really cover it much or take it seriously. It is now passed in the Chinese legislative process and will probably, I don't know exactly when it will come into effect because I haven't read it in Chinese or anything, but I assume it'll come into effect later this year and will be a major problem. We'll see why here. So this law is designed to shield Chinese entities and institutions from, quote, unilateral and discriminatory measures imposed by foreign countries. This is basically taking aim at the United States and the United States' position that it has the right to sanction and impose those sanctions across the world to anybody, and what we in the legal field call the long-arm jurisdiction of the United States. What this does is that it will enable the Chinese government to sanction all who comply with United States or even European Union sanctions by forcing entities to choose whether they're going to comply with U.S. sanctions or Chinese sanctions, or Chinese non-sanctions, right, or do business with China. So the United States, as probably a lot of our clients will know, the United States is a very prolific sanction utilizer. Especially in the last couple of years, we've been sanctioning all sorts of things right and left. And really, this is China taking a page out of the United States' playbook on sanctions. This is the same position that the United States takes on its own sanctions on others. And what that is the United States will impose its law on anyone, anywhere, who may have some tenuous touch or tenuous interaction with the United States. So that means even a company who's based in the European Union, say a German company who is doing business with Iran, if they have any type of connection with the United States, and this can be as simple as have a bank account with the United States, or certainly a branch office, if they have any type of personnel in the United States, they are definitely, in the U.S.'s opinion, U.S. government's opinion, they are definitely subject to adhering to our laws and our sanctions, the U.S. This can even be taken to the extreme that a company or an individual doing business with a sanctioned person and they are handling that transaction, whatever it may be, a sale or whatever, opening a bank account or something, if it is handled in U.S. dollars, then you are subject to adhering to and following U.S. sanctions law. It can get very, very tenuous, like I said, but it's there. It's going to happen. And if you have any other interactions in the U.S., they will use that interaction. They will use whatever you have in the United States to force you to comply with U.S. sanctions laws. So really, probably the most recent examples of this was the European Union companies in the recent past, when the joint, I forget what the acronym stands for, but it's like the JCPOA, basically the agreement with Iran and the European Union and I guess China, whoever else, to allow nuclear regulators back in and for them to take certain steps to ensure that weapons aren't being produced. And then the United States, we paid them some money, whatever, and we started allowing certain business interactions to take place with Iran and dropping some of those sanctions. That was signed under Obama. Then under the Trump administration, what happened was the United States withdrew from that agreement. It was never a treaty. It was never ratified in the Senate, so it was merely an executive office program. So he had the right, and he did. He withdrew from it, rightly or wrongly. Doesn't matter. But we withdrew from it, and the United States took the position that European Union companies who continued to interact with Iran based on that joint agreement, the JCPOA, whatever, who continued to do business with Iran, were then going to face the enforcement of U.S. sanctions and be liable for breaking our laws, for breaking U.S. sanctions law. So the European Union took the position that that's not okay. We're going to create a special depository company or bank. I don't remember exactly what the terminology was, but they created a special entity that was going to funnel all funds and monies for any type of transactions with Iran for European Union companies. And the point was to take the European Union companies' potential financial transactions with Iran out of any U.S. reach, right? The U.S. wouldn't be able to reach in and stop that and pause it. I believe they're still doing that. I'm not sure what has happened with that, but I assume that any European Union companies who are doing business with Iran are still utilizing that special entity. I'd have to ask some of my European Union colleagues about that in particular. But that comes to mind. That's one of the responses that we've seen internationally for responding to U.S. sanctions laws, and when the U.S. tries to force third parties to start following our laws. This is kind of taken it a step further. These are countermeasures by China that's basically doing what the United States already does, like I mentioned. What the Chinese law enables China and their government to do is to refuse the issuance of visas, denial of entry, deportation. This is of individuals and businesses who are adhering to foreign sanctions laws against Chinese businesses or against Chinese officials. So this could affect literally any business in China or any business person in China or out of China that is following U.S. sanctions laws and wants to continue doing business in China. You will not be able to do that any longer. And I expect this will be enforced by China. I don't think it's just posturing on their part. I think they're putting the law out there. They'll probably give some time before they'll start enforcing it and figuring out how they're going to enforce it. But what I would expect to happen, and the way China has handled some of these types of laws in the past, is they'll probably pick one major visible violator of this new Chinese law, and then they will enforce it. They'll start enforcing that law, and it'll be out of the blue. The company will be caught with their pants down, essentially, in China, and it'll be a major problem. It'll make the news, and basically that'll be the warning shot to everybody else doing business with China, that they will either comply with U.S. sanctions or they will do business with China. There will be no other options that you'll be allowed to do. So interestingly enough, took a little aside there, other countermeasures that China can take, and this is very interesting, and this is exactly what the United States does, so they're just really copying exactly what we already do. But it allows China to seize and freeze the property of individuals and businesses who are following foreign sanctions. So if you are a business in the United States and you're following U.S. sanctions law and refuse to sell whatever, some kind of XYZ to a sanctioned person or entity in China, then you could have any assets, any type of property that is in China or within the reach of China, they could seize it from you, which is unprecedented. This is only, I think probably only the United States is the only country in the world that actually has the capacity in the past to do something like that, and now China will certainly be trying to do that as well. Let's see if there's any other items here I wanted to cover on this article. So obviously the AFP news team, they quoted that it's left European and American companies shocked and facing irreconcilable compliance issues. It's totally true. I don't know why they would be shocked seeing the growing sanctions war back and forth. This is, I can't reiterate this enough, this is exactly what the United States already does. So they're getting better at playing ball with the U.S. Kudos to the Chinese government for that. And then one final comment I wanted to make is another interesting restriction, that they can impose everything that I mentioned before: seizing property, denying visas, deportation. They can impose this not only on the individuals and businesses who violate that Chinese law, but the Chinese law will also allow it to impact the family members of individuals who violate this Chinese law, this Chinese statute. and will allow the Chinese courts to punish companies that comply with foreign laws. So just I'll link to this article here on Zero Hedge in the description, but it is really an example of blowback, in my opinion. The U.S. Love of sanctions and how we utilize them as a weapon on the geopolitical scale. It's going to come back and bite us. Us being, U.S. business and in our economic situation. It's not good that we're trying to impose all these sanctions on third parties and people around the world for silly things, right and left. It's going to happen that other countries are going to retaliate. I would expect if China is successful in imposing some of this, I would expect other countries and blocs to impose something similar. Russia comes to mind, certainly. How much of an impact that'll have on the U.S. is probably very low, though. Our trade with Russia has been falling quite a bit. But China, it's still one of our number one trade partners. So it's something very concerning. How this is going to be imposed on companies in China or doing business with China, we'll have to wait and see what happens. But this should be an extremely big red flag for anybody doing business in China and a harbinger of what they should expect in the future. So with that, we'll wrap up. Check out the details in the description below, and feel free to reach out to Reidel Law Firm if we can help you out with any sanctions issues.